So tell me, what do you guys want to talk about?
Well, private practice because yeah, that is still like everything to us. Lee finished it not long ago.
Yeah,
Oh,
I finished it back in January, so it's
oh,
still
wow.
fresh in my mind.
And I've
Oh,
already
probably fresher than in my mind, forgive me. But I deep in the recesses, way too many good experiences not to recount a lot of it. But funnily, I was recently ER Fight Master, who you know from Grey's Anatomy, of course. We had to do a bit of trivia about the shows, and I could not believe how many things I got wrong because I am so ironclad in my study of what the character is and this and the that and the relationships and all that. But it just, after a decade, left me and became very comical. I couldn't remember what my father died of in the show. I have a great photograph of myself taking a nap on a lawn outside of the set because it was such a long, arduous week. And Paul Adelstein, who was my Cooper to my Charlotte on Private, took a picture of me. And my husband likes to call it when I possum out. Apparently, I curl up like a little possum when I sleep. And there is a photograph of me just laying on the ground sleeping to sort of catch up on sleep. So funny, I remember that, but not the most important thing, which is how my father in the episode died. What type of cancer? I couldn't remember which one it was. So bad. You don't think of when you make something like, I don't think of it having an international voice, right? Like you're just doing the thing you love. And that's how I felt about that show. It was a very magical, very unique experience because we all loved each other so much amongst the cast. Even for cast members that left the show, like Chris Lowell, who played Dell in the earlier.
that was so sad.
It was like,
I know. Well, he and my son are born on the same day, and he grew up, funnily enough, like 30 minutes from me, Chris Lowell himself. So we had an instant connection. When he left the show, I was so sad. But it is as if he never left the show. He still very much was in contact with all of us, and we were so happy to see the continued success that he has had and had at the time. Um, so it's funny, like we still commune as much as anyone can after 10 years of keeping touch, because it's a funny business. You make you guys are actors, you make your fake families, and then you sort of your puppies in a box, and then you move on. And for us, we've just all stayed very connected, and that's been part of the beauty of that. I think when Shonda cast that show, she really understood some unconscious alchemy amongst people. Had so many laughs. But I do love that your instinct about the show was there was nothing like it at the time, because you're not wrong. I mean, I was talking with some people in the trans community, and I was noting when I had that storyline with Sheldon, and we had someone in transition at the time on the show, that just was not talked about in the way that Shonda in the writer's room connected to something. I think I will say this. There's something so remarkable about being a part of something that identifies human experience, marginalization of certain people with certain life experiences, and does it in such a way that makes it relatable to anyone. Was edgier than most things, and it was more humanizing than most things, I think. I mean, I think part of what I feel I was a part of on that show is a connection to the main characters equal to wonderful guest star arcs, because I think so much of television, when it is procedural, which this was a medical procedural show, you connect to the cases on those things so much. You invest in, what the guest star's wild story arc is. But I feel like the writers did such a wonderful job of balancing that with really investing in the core cast.
All right, everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of the Double L Show. And today we have another very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, I'm KaDee Strickland. You may have had the opportunity, as these guys have, to have seen my work on private practice.
Like private practice, the spin-off to Grey's Anatomy, in like you look at it, it's got more humor and it's got more jokes. And even though Grey's Anatomy does have that, and Grey's Anatomy can be serious,
God.
I think like the storylines
God.
the storylines that private practice go into, they leave you more sort of on edge in like jaw dropped because of how deep they go into the details. Like, yeah, Grey's Anatomy have what they do, but like compared to what the time period it was in, it was like you say a bit revolutionary for them to talk about all the stuff that they did. So, did you think back when you were first filming it? Did you think how sort of influential the show would be nowadays?
I mean, nowadays, it's an interesting question, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of it. Sort of like anything in life, when you do something that you feel in your cells, right? There's certain times, because I was the youngin' of the bunch too. Those guys had all had giant careers, and I had worked. I mean, I had worked, but I had not worked in television like Tim Daly and Amy Brenneman had. These epic, historic, Emmy-nominated show. They'd done that dance. Taye Diggs. You've got Audra McDonald, who has the voice of an angel. I got to share a trailer with her for the early days on that show, and let me tell you, when she would rehearse to go and do a concert, there was nothing better. That voice was epic, and still is. But I digress. At the time, to answer your question, I didn't know the landscape of television the way those guys had, and we did know. I mean, I love to show up to something very fresh, right? Because every experience is going to be different. Every character is going to be different. Every alchemy amongst the cast is going to be a different experience. And you will meet people, particularly in an ensemble like that, who might work a different way. And I love the learning of how that is. And I could tell when Tim and Amy, particularly because they had history, because Tim's sister, Tyne Daly, had worked with Amy Brenneman. So there was a lot of historic stuff going on there, but I could tell that they had a certain feeling about the show and what we were doing. I suppose just a new direction in what my career was going to look like. And frankly, I had not seen Grey's Anatomy until right before I met Shonda Rhimes. I had to really overeducate myself in a quick way. And I immediately got why people were in love with the show the minute I watched the pilot. And when I met with Shonda and Mark Tinker and Betsy Beers, those were the people that Linda Lowy, the casting director, brought me in to have a sit down with. They didn't tell me whether it was going to be Grey's Anatomy or this new spinoff show with Kate Walsh. So I didn't even know what I was going up for. I just went to have a conversation. And that was also a very different process than I was used to. But what was amazing about private, like when I look back on that, I mean, you want to talk about knowing something special. I remember the day Melissa McCarthy came in, actually pregnant with her child. And that woman did lunges, as you see in the show, endlessly. And I remember thinking, God, she's something else. So I have these very crystallized moments of understanding that I was encountering. I mean, and I don't use this word loosely, really phenomenal talent and artists on that show. And so for me, I did feel that was special. And I had been in a remarkable cast prior to that for my first real television gig, but it wasn't lasting. And I did feel that private practice was going to have a long life at the time. And I was so happy that that was accurate. But I think we all did sort of I think we knew it was special, but I think we knew we had a good thing going, and that's what made it feel sort of like a revelation to each of us. Like there is that marriage of the thing you love doing, which for me is acting.
I mean, that does sound amazing about everything that happened. What was it that sort of drew you to Charlotte? What stood out about that character for you?
I mean, it's funny when Shonda personally called me and told me she was offering me a job, and I was like, "Great. Do you want me to have a standard American accent?" She would, "No, everybody in LA is a transplant." I was like, "Okay, so you want her to sound like me?" She was like, "Yeah, whatever you want." And I was like, "Okay." And then when they started writing the character, I definitely found the vocal pattern that I thought made sense for Charlotte, because there were so many remarkable one-liners that I was given. But I didn't know who I was going to be playing. I didn't know. I just knew I was going to play the chief of staff, and I knew based on what Chandra Wilson was doing that is going to be somebody spirited. Having seen her on Grey's, I think they wanted another pint-sized powerhouse presence. And I say that to say I knew I was going to have full permission. Like Charlotte King is completely permissed with her point of view at all times, and smart and salty and sexual and also capable of growth. As locked in to her point of view as Charlotte often was, it was never just because. There was always a reason to the impulsivity, and there was always a truth to it. And that seed made her such a character to play, that seed and spirit inside of her. And frankly, my mother's medical, and I've talked about this before, but she's a nationally recognized nurse back in the day. She's obviously, well, not obviously, she's retired now, but she taught nursing as well as working in hospitals. She had a very fascinating career. Like when she was becoming a nurse, she took care of Flannery O'Connor, the author. So she had all these wild experiences, and I would hear about them as a child. And what I really understood is there's a certain sense, I mean, as much as people talk about surgeons and doctors having a God complex and all this stuff, which can be true. Many people can have God complexes, but when you're literally holding someone's life and death in the balance of your hand, whether it be a child being born or a person dying, you have access to what feels like, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, the cauldron of humanity, really. Doctors dip their hands in human experience daily, and there's often a lot at stake. But I do think that is a very exciting environment to storytell. You know, a person who can handle that, because I couldn't do it. I couldn't, which is part of why I'm an actor. My sensitivity and empathy has to be channeled in the way that it is. I couldn't channel it with that much on the line at all times. And it's funny, this is a crazy story that I'll tell you, just because we are talking about the character arc and personality. When you play a character that long and for that many months of the year, it certain things do stick in your unconscious mind creatively that you carry over in life. So my husband and I, at the time, we were not yet parents, but we were visiting my family. I'm from Georgia. And we were in the gym with my sister. She was showing us this gym that she liked to work out in because we wanted to get a workout in. And she accidentally dropped a weight on the tip of her finger as she was changing the, you know how you put a pen in a stack of weights?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And it chopped the tip of her finger off. So we recovered the tip, took her to the hospital, my father, my husband, and myself. And we were in the, the ER waiting to go in. And she was sitting for a while. And I knew that finger it had to be sewn back on if she was going to recover it. And I felt myself go to that staff. And it was like I got possessed by Charlotte King. I was like, do you know how much time we have left on this? Because I do. And if you continue to waste our time, I mean, I was like, what is happening to me now? I don't do that. I'm not salty with other people in that way. That is just not accessible in my nature unless I'm really pushed. But in this moment, and I think probably because it's my family and this felt very urgent. It's just the tip of a finger, frankly, but and people have lived with much less on their bodies. But I felt very in charge in that moment. And it's funny because she got assisted right away the minute I took that tone with someone. And then I immediately got so embarrassed and I realized I just got possessed by Charlotte King. That's what just happened to me. So I don't know why I told you that story. I haven't thought about it for some time, but I guess when I talk about that character, I do know that certain aspects of me were unlocked in a way in order to perform that are not second nature to me. And that can be so fun as a performer, having access to a different avenue of self. And I feel like those writers gave me a lot of opportunities to do that with her. Don't know if that answered your question either.
I mean, it kind of did. Yeah.
I don't want to
Interesting.
go to the gym ever now. I think
Yeah.
that's something I would do.
Just be very mindful when you change the pen on weights. That's the moral of
Yeah.
that tale.
I'm glad, like, they let you do the accent because I think if Charlotte had a sort of different accent and they didn't have sort of the one-liner jokes that she was known for, it would have really changed the character. It wouldn't have been as sort of standout as the character was. Lola, what is your questions on Private Practice?
Why do you think Charlotte kept so much of her life secret? It was kind of like she was embarrassed in the beginning that people knew her and knew her existence.
Well, that's an interesting thing. My sort of take on that was always when you're in a position of leadership. And I thought, interestingly, because the character was Southern, it allowed me to understand the secret of nature because in the South, particularly women, it to generalize, and certainly times evolve, but if we're being very frank, women, I mean, I don't have to tell you, I mean, we're coming up on the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling about Roe v. Wade tomorrow for us here in the States. And in the South, in particular, women really are not equal. There is a general feeling that you have to be performative for men, that you have to allow men to take care of you, that the patriarchy rules. And for someone like Charlotte, I felt that was an important layer to sort of, because I had the accent, in order to be taken seriously, you can show no weakness and give no details. And I feel like it's sort of a general trope with storytelling, right? There is sort of the person in the position of power has the weight of the world and all of these things to command. So the less humanized you are for others, the more you can get away with being taken seriously. And I think for Charlotte, the secret of nature came out of a deep need to be taken seriously, to remain in the position of power, which is why I always thought it was so great to have so many other strong women around that character. And I say strong women and strong personalities, female, with agency. And for Charlotte to show any weakness would not allow sort of the DNA and the structuring of where she came from. It wouldn't allow her to have any freedom or any frank confidence, if that makes sense.
How did it feel to portray an important storyline about sexual assault / attack?
Changed my life. You say it and it still washes through me. It's been, there are the personal things in life, like becoming a parent, becoming a partner with my life partner. And that, separate of my own individual family, is the most important thing I've ever done, I would say, because it still affects me regularly. It has given me a certain purpose, to connect with people on this issue and to be of service in a real way is what Shonda gave me the opportunity to do. We were filming, I'll never forget it. We were filming out at these very beautiful gardens here in Los Angeles. I feel like it was a wedding or some event. I feel like it was a wedding. Because I was dressed up and I had a very fancy hairstyle that day. I remember that. And I remember trying not to mess it up and walking around these very tall shoes. It's funny what silly things you remember about iconic moments, right? And I say iconic because it was iconic for me. And I remember seeing Shonda. She was on set that day. And she said, "Can I have a word?" And I was like, "Sure." And Shonda wasn't on set every day. She really trusted the writers who had the episodes. And she obviously had a lot of irons in the fire between all the shows she was either going to develop or with Grey's and Private at the time. But she was there for this particular day. And she said to me, "I want to do something with Charlotte and I want to make sure you're okay with it." Which, again, what a gift to have someone as prolific as Shonda be clear with you about their intention and let you know that they respect your you're taking something like this on. And Shonda said to me, "I want to do this with your character and I want to make sure, you're good with that." And I said, "You have me 100% in if you can promise me this, that as long as the show goes on, we will reflect on it in some way." And she made good on that. I remember one of the survivors I worked with, because it's also very specific sexual violence. It's in the workplace. It's with a stranger. It's very violent. To be beaten to a point of being unrecognizable on top of being violated sexually is a very large thing to take on. I told the writers that for them to incorporate having Addison do the exam and just the simple line of saying, "The last time you did this, it was very different." That's not the exact language, but pretty much just the recognition that both Charlotte and Addison had a shared moment of understanding that this was not easy, that it was triggering, and that it was deeply vulnerable all over again, and making it come back in, even though this should be a celebrated experience. The fact that the writers wrote that in meant more to me than you could ever know, because it was a proper recognition of the survivor that I had worked with. And it was also proper recognition of something no one talks about. That violation is something that happens to your soul and your physical body. And to have ever been trusted to portray that the way I was trusted meant everything to me as a performer. And it grew me bigger, and it allowed me to then go speak on behalf of rape kits on Capitol Hill, and just really meet a wonderful community of human beings that have a bravery and a spirit of resurrection, because I think that's what it takes so often, you know. So really loved that for a character that had been so hypersexual and intimate in a specific way, to then see the growth of needing a different type of intimacy after that event with Cooper, and how that affected him. I also really, frankly, one of the details that Shonda had put in the script that I thought was so remarkable is Charlotte had to take care of him, couldn't take care of herself in that moment. And one of the things we did that was, I think, a real gift, is we hid me from Paul. He didn't see me until that take that you see in the show. He had not seen me. So that was a very pure response, because, I mean, he's like family to me. And when he saw me, what you saw on camera is what happened to him. And to allow an actor that type of impulse to be caught on camera was very powerful, because I knew he hated seeing me like that, and I knew the character of Cooper hated seeing Charlotte like that. It was unthinkable. And I think when you're allowed as an actor to do things that are unthinkable in the human experience, and for a director like Allison Liddy Brown to be smart enough to know, we get this one time and one time only, everybody's got to be fully present, ready, and allow him to be vulnerable. I'm not someone who's ever satisfied with my work, ever. I don't watch my performances and think, well done, you. But I can say, because of the response, I know that what it felt like to be in that episode, and the episodes that followed, and the journey that the character was on, I felt I tapped into something truthful. And I am proud of that work. And someday my child will see that work, and I will be proud that my child saw that work. And I can't say that about everything I've done. You know, I mean, that's a rare sort of ask for an actor, to feel really good. I mean, sure, they're egotistical people that are very proud of their work. And there's nothing wrong with that if that works for them. But I am never satisfied. And that is probably one of the few times I can really say I'm pleased that it turned out the way it did.
Do you think Charlotte and Cooper would still be together?
You know, it's so funny, because I just worked with Paul again on a show that just came out here in the
Yeah,
States.
we've watched it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I mean, I do. I just feel like they're stuck with each other in life. But there is, of course, there's a whole contingency of audience that, as I've learned, would have loved to have seen Charlotte and Amelia have a tryst, which is just so funny, because I just don't think conceptually Cooper and Charlotte would ever be done with each other. I think they're stuck. And I think that's a lovely thing. I think they probably drive each other nuts in positive ways and in negative ways. And I'm sad that we haven't been able to revisit those characters, because 10 years later, I think it'd be so interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that they cast us with completely different characters on a completely different show, and that he and I got to sit around on that set and have such a laugh about the good old days when we play those characters, because we do have a real shorthand. I mean, Paul and I, it's funny, I remember being so surprised when Shonda put us together, like such a surprise. And it literally came to her by watching dailies of us sitting in a scene together. And I think it just sparked something in her creativity, to put us together. And I don't think either one of us had any idea that we'd have such chemistry in that way. But there is something about watching the two of us that's fun.
Do you think people forget the show exists because from like being in fandoms, people are like, private practice, what are you talking about? I've never heard of it. I'm just like, have you not heard of the spin-off? They're like, wait, no, there's only Station 19. I'm like, no, there's not. Like, I feel like they're misunderstood, like quite a lot of the characters, if they haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because you've had Kate go back on Grey's, obviously, in the last few years. And I was just with some of the Station 19 people and some of the Grey's people. And it is interesting. I am learning that people aren't familiar with the show. But I am also learning that because of these social media chats, people are discovering the show that didn't know about it. It's a strange thing to be a part of something that was so life altering and for people to not know about it. But I love when people discover it. And I think, the strange thing is it still holds up. Those issues still hold up. There's still interesting conversations to have in the medium of television. So, as old as it is at this point, just so crazy to me. It's just crazy to me that was off the air 10 years ago.
Would you ever join Grey's Anatomy? Because a lot of fans have been begging.
In a heartbeat. I mean, all they'd have to do is ask. I would truly, and I love acting with Katarina. That's why I was fortunate that we had a relationship on that show that the writers took to, because honest to God, I mean, she is a dream of a human being and she's a hell of an actor. So that to have anything to do with her again would be great. And it's a character I loved doing. So I would be so interested to see how the writers would, crack that egg, so to speak. I would be very interested to see what they would do, but I would happily do it.
What is your favorite on-set memory?
I mean, I get asked this question and it always changes a little bit because there were so many. But probably, I mean, when we would work those crazy hours, we would get punchy and entertain ourselves way too much. Taye Diggs would always grab me and spin me around and we would dance. But the table reads were magic because it's the first time you read the script. Everybody's in the room. You're all having lunch. You could have come from God knows what, or you could have had a day off. But it was such a, nobody was on their phones. Nobody was doing anything but reading it for the first time and hearing it out loud for the first time. And having worked during the pandemic and trying to do a table read on a Zoom was just so disastrous and so not fun that I really look back at that time with such reverence, because you can imagine too, when you're seeing the dialogue for the first time at a table read and you say some of the shit that I said. I mean, just trying to get through it and actually read it intentionally for the writers to hear, because sometimes the scripts would just literally land there because they would have been in edits. But sometimes you get them in advance. And, table read is very important. That allows someone like Shonda and her writing staff to see what needs to shift. And you have to be respectful of that process. People that don't take that process seriously, I don't understand them, because it ultimately lends itself to exactly what you're going to be spending your days and weeks shooting. So it's really important that you give to the table read 100%. But sometimes if it was a new draft or a new edit and you hadn't seen it, to hear it come out of your mouth for the first time, or to hear other people, we would have such a laugh. I mean, and also to try to say medical jargon when you don't know what you're talking about just yet, because you haven't had the opportunity to research or pronounce correctly. That was always quite good fun. Yeah, I mean, it's and I feel like our business has changed so much. I'm a person who generally books work in the room. Like the in-person collaboration is where I thrive. Zooms are not. I really hate self-taping with a vehement passion, mostly because it's unnatural for me as an actor to watch myself and to choose my best work, quote unquote. It's hideous. And you can't take adjustments in the room. So you're sort of just, which I think is part of the fun of it, right? You know, and even the live Zoom, like, my God, I had a producer session before we went on strike. And it's just like eye lines alone. You can't look at the reader because in the visual of the playback of the tape, it looks like you're staring at their belly button. So that's not going to give anyone the best version of work.
Yeah.
So what's your next question?
It's about Cruel Summer.
Oh, fair.
Yeah, because I watched all of the first season, and I used to have a reminder on, and I don't know why, but it didn't remind us, and I was like, wait, I'm like 2 weeks behind now. So then I had to just like binge watch the whole thing.
Yeah, the first season's really solid. I loved it.
I couldn't believe the ending. I still can't believe it.
Yeah, it's good.
They just like left it. Lee hasn't seen it yet because I give him everything last minute. He's got so many to watch because I'm like, have you watched this yet? And he's like, no. It's like, you have to watch this now. Did you watch the first season, which we've just talked about briefly?
Did I watch the first season?
Yeah.
Yes, I loved it. I'm a fan of some of those actors. I actually worked with Michael Landis, who I know has gone to your neck of the woods quite a lot and worked.
Yeah.
He and I did that David E. Kelly show that I mentioned earlier together, and he's a lovely actor. But they had very arresting billboards all over town, and because I have a child, like for me to sit down and watch anything with purpose, often it takes me a while. When I saw this, I was mind blown. I also thought it was really cool that Jessica Biel had developed it through her company. I was very curious about that. But Sarah Drew's a lovely actor. Andrea Anders, lovely actor. And I can tell you, like Andrea, back when we were in person in rooms, we would be in the same waiting room. And she was always so great. And as it turned out, we studied with the same person in New York. So a lot of people I admire, but those kids were incredible. And the story was so interesting. The story of grooming and how they story told, I thought was incredible.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I mean, that all the music, the looks, that was from my youth. So that for me to revisit that was quite a kick.
Yeah, one thing I loved, because as a filmmaker, was how they used different filters for each like year, so it was so much easier to tell apart.
That was for when we shot the second season, because it's anthology and none of the same characters. When I saw their storyboards of the cinematographer and the look, because we had the same cinematographer, and because it's set in a different location, certainly Washington State feels very different. The Pacific Northwest couldn't be more opposite than Texas. And I thought the saturation of that and how they tried to put that mood in was such an interesting concept. And I've been so lucky. I mean, you know, it's funny, the DPs that I've worked with, Lex DuPont, who did Private Practice, did Twin Peaks. That blew my mind. I mean, talk about good stories, but talk about like the scope of a person's talent to go from that to that. What a swing. So same with our DP, and we had rotating DPs on Cruel Summer. To see the input that goes into the choices based on the material and based on what really worked in the first season and how to tweak it just a bit to make it interesting for the second season and specific to the new world, as it were, I thought was so interesting. But I love that you picked up on that too. It's a really cool advice. And you are a writer, so you would notice things like that.
Yeah. You're just like, I can pick up everything. I can pick up continuity. I just know.
It's easy to spot once you start know what you're looking for in a way.
It also
We had
ruins a
great
lot.
continuity on both shows too, by the
Yeah.
way. And I still, the private practice, the continuity script supervisor that we had on that show, we still go get lunch. She's great. Susie Sachs. So yes. Anything else about Cruel Summer?
Yeah. Although we're never gonna, like, I feel like it's gonna take forever to come out here, or it'll stop streaming midway, because that's what it likes to do. I can see that. What are we to expect this season? And have you already seen the episodes the whole season?
I've not seen all of them. I've only seen the first 7. And I didn't press to get the others. I like watching in real time with the audience. I think that's fun. It's also, I prefer to watch by myself before I've seen it with my husband. The worst is when you have to see something with an audience for the first time. But I was very fortunate in that they gave us the first 7. And some of the other cast wanted to see all the way through, and they have done. But I want to see that final episode in real time with the audience. I think that's going to be fun because, to your point with the first season, they swing big with the endings and the surprises and the whodunit and all that.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun, I think, for the audience to see what choice they made for the ending. But I really do love that for the audience, it's a whole lot of who do I trust?
Yeah, definitely.
Who do I trust? Which I think is so fun to watch, personally.
Definitely.
Especially, it's also, there's something so great about telling teenage stories. And for me personally, my character is very sex positive with her child. And I think that that's something that's really important to show adults have dialogue with their kids about things like that, about intimacy in the way that we did. And I remember talking to Sadie about that while we were shooting. I was like, this feels so good to do this because I didn't see that in television growing up. And I think that's really important because I think, you know, oftentimes when we watch something on television, it does somehow engage us and influence us, you know, for good and bad. So if I'm part of something that would spark a conversation to make a teenager feel safe to have important conversations with their parents about their sexuality, that's amazing to me. Again, I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting. People become actors for different reasons. They become writers for different reasons. But for me, as much as I love doing it, and being on set is like nothing else in the world. I mean, it's my happy place. And it gives me so much purpose. But if I can be a part of something that has affected people's health and well-being in any way, that just is like, God, that is just gold, really.
The next question, because you haven't seen the ending, who do you think kills Luke? Because there's a lot of theories going around.
I'm not going to say, because I do know what was filmed. So if I tip any hats, although I know that there's not just one ending that they filmed.
Oh.
Ooh.
Because that's how they keep us all on our toes, right? As actors. I mean, the entire time, by the way, in the hair and makeup trailer, because nobody got that intel, you know, at the beginning of the season. They changed things constantly in those scripts. And I think that's part of how the story evolves, yes. And I feel it's how they keep the actors engaged as well. I think that's a device that has worked well for that production entity.
Do you think the show promotes nostalgia?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the wardrobe fittings alone was very sweet. When we would have our fittings, they had a record player that was playing music from the era, and they had original magazines from that time frame as well. So that was a lot of fun to
That's
just
so
sit.
creative.
It was, yeah. I mean, that was a hoot. But also, I would look through these magazines, and I remembered reading Jane magazine, and they had that, and one of the magazines, I can't remember exactly which one because they had a variety of them, had my husband in it from when he was on Roswell. It was an article about them. And I just thought that is hilarious and how wonderful. Because we couldn't reference, like, we couldn't put posters or anything of actual shows from that era legally in the sets, but we had enough tips of the hat to look like certain things from that era. But it is so funny. I mean, I was talking to the girls about their playlists, like what I listened to when I was a teenager from that time frame. I was in New York at the time that Y2K happened, but still very very aware of what I was into. So it's funny.
Horror.
What?
We love horror.
Horror.
Do you love horror?
I do.
Nobody ever does. That's the weird thing.
I love horror, and I did as a child. I was obsessed with it. I would fall asleep on Sunday mornings at church, embarrassingly for my family, because I would stay up watching. There was like where I lived, they would run horror films on Saturday nights. And I had a few that I would watch on a loop. But when I got good grades, I could go to the video store and choose a movie when I was a kid, and it was always a horror. I just love it. I think it's I don't find it scary. I find it delightful to watch, and I don't know why.
Yeah, we watched The Grudge earlier.
Yeah.
That movie changed my life. I didn't now have a child as a result of that film.
Honestly, I found it so funny. I don't know why.
The film?
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with Nicolas Cage, and he is a horror buff. And it's funny because he loves that film, and he did not realize that that was me. And the reverence Nicolas Cage gave me because of The Grudge. And I'm the same. I find that it's kind of comical at times. But I think horror and comedy are very similar in a lot of ways. I feel like the state of being that you're put in when you see them can be similar. Fear and laughter. There's something about a personal suspension of self that happens when you laugh a lot or when you're afraid. And I think horror is really good at doing that, at that device. But I do find, like, there are things quite comical about The Grudge. I get it. But it scares some people so much, which I think is comical. Because for me, that movie is such a joy bringer.
How did the role in The Sixth Sense come about?
Oh, funny. So I went to an acting conservatory in Philadelphia called the University of the Arts, and it was all theater training, which was wonderful, but everything was theater. And there was a local casting director in Philly called Mike Lemon, and he was very famous. He had cast 12 Monkeys and all these other things, and a couple of my professors were in 12 Monkeys. And as a result of, so we would hear their stories about being on film sets, and I would go see them in plays. Very good theater community in Philadelphia. And I thought, well, I could learn about film if I was an intern at the casting agency for Mike Lemon. So I went and I got a job as an intern. And this movie was going to come and be made called The Sixth Sense. And I also worked in a restaurant, and I worked a shift. I'll never forget it. I knew who was involved in the movie because of the auditioning that was happening, and because I was a reader for the auditioning for people. And I was working the lunch shift on a day that I never work. I was filling in for someone, and these 4 men came in. As it turned out, it was M. Night Shyamalan, his DP, his first AD, and his assistant. And at the time, I didn't realize, but I remember 3 of the people got the same thing. And when they came to the 4th one, and it was like some turkey sandwich. It was like a play on a Thanksgiving dish that we have, but it was in the form of a sandwich. It's, again, strange what you remember, right? So the 4th person ordered something different. And I said, you just broke continuity. And just making a joke. I didn't realize who I was talking to. And they all laughed at that. And then they said, that is funny. It's true. You did. And then they eventually told me what they were doing. And I went, oh, that's so interesting. I intern at Mike Lemon Casting. Good luck with the film. I've been watching some of the talent, the local talent you guys are hiring, because I intern there. That's all it was. So then I went back to casting, and somehow, I can't remember if they were in the room with me or something, but I was reading, or they heard me read. Somehow Night ended up giving me this role of visitor number 5. The very funny thing to me is a lot of people think that I'm Misha Barton. They think I'm the child. And I'm like, first of all, I was an adult. Thanks. High compliment. But they were so wonderful to me. I ended up getting my union card because of that film. My Screen Actors Guild at the time. It wasn't SAG-AFTRA at the time. It was just Screen Actors Guild.
How good are you at accents? Because I love your accent. It's so cool.
Thank you. When I was in college, I had a great ear. That's funny. Our kid has a great ear. So when I work on it, I'm quite facile with things. I can do them pretty well, but I haven't, so much of acting. You want to transform. You want to play different characters, and that is definitely a gift when you're able to. But a lot of the time you get hired because of something that is paralleled somewhere within you and this character that you communicate. So I was hell-bent on not being Southern all the time. And of course, more often than not, people ask me to have my accent. But I remember I did the sequel to Anaconda. I did Anacondas. It was one of the first large roles I had in film. And I did not want to be Southern, but they wanted me to be Southern. And I thought, okay, well, that's something that'll define my character and something I understand. So, okay, fine. And when the film came out, my mother was irate. I told her, like, don't read reviews and things. It's really not the point. But I guess someone had said that I had the worst Southern accent in a review. And my mother was like, that idiot doesn't pay attention. Like I remember I was like, Mama, you can't. I mean, you just can't read this stuff. It's a slippery slope. The good's as bad as the bad, because if you're defining your work through other people's point of view in that realm, especially now with social media, my God, it'll just eat you alive. But I thought that was classic. I was like, well, welcome to Hollywood. Worst Southern accent on the planet. You're welcome.
How does it feel to be the original vlogger? Because apparently there's loads of vlogs circulating YouTube that you did on Private Practice.
What's that?
Yeah, vlogs.
Yeah, there's a load on YouTube when you type your name in of you just like talking to a camera on like kind of the set, sort of like, here I am. Oh,
yes. I did that with The Grudge as well. I mean, I don't know. You have all these DVDs, so you would know. There used to be a thing where they would do behind the scenes. That was sort of built in. And I love that stuff. I mean, I think P.T. Anderson is a brilliant filmmaker, but he used to do so much supplemental material that just educated me about cinema, frankly, when I would watch those things. So when the opportunities came up, I was like, I will absolutely do this, because it's rare that anybody gets behind the scenes look, but I know the one with private practice that you're talking about. That was magical to be the one that got to do that. I loved it.
It just started lashing down, fully raining.
Oh yeah, done.
That's dramatic. Maybe that'll cool you guys off a bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to go and
Yeah,
run
well-
out in it.
I love doing that too.
So fun.
Well, that's all you have for me?
Yeah.
'Cause, I
Yeah,
mean,
it is,
boy,
yeah.
did I go off like a rocket? My God, sorry guys.
It's fine.
It's alright.
I'll tag you in a post whenever it happens. I'll probably just
Love
put a story out. I always put stories out.
Well, when will this come out?
Sunday, because I've got to
Sunday.
edit round.
Yeah, you're going to be deep in an edit there, honey. My apologies. But I do love talking about this stuff. It really does trigger so many memories, and hopefully it's coherent and useful. Good luck with that. But it's
Thank
been
you.
lovely to spend my morning with you.